started recording. Give it 10 seconds.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Workers in the Bay. This is a project about affordability and working class families and people in San Francisco and the greater Bay Area. I'm here with my co-producer, Lloyd Francis Jr. And please like and subscribe our channel here on YouTube. We're trying to get this on track and be more consistent with our shows. So we appreciate your support here on our Patreon project. Our guest today, I'm really excited, is Emil De Guzman. Emil De Guzman, like me and Lloyd, is a native of the Bay Area. Emil's a native of San Francisco. And Emil is someone I met maybe about 5 years ago around conversations I've been having about the public school system in San Francisco, my alma mater. Emil, like me, is a graduate of San Francisco Unified Public Schools, and we really benefited from that educational experience back when San Francisco was very different. But Emil is really an important person. He's a nice person. He's great, very smart, very strong. And in particular, I wanted to have Emil guest on Workers in the Bay because Emil has been involved in housing affordability activism for a very long time. And I want to also, Emil, congratulate you on your 2024 book, which is Red Sky, Recollections of the International Hotel, which chronicles a really important housing affordability standoff that happened in San Francisco in the early 70s. And it involved elderly people that were trying to not get evicted. The landlord was being a jerk, not a surprise. But Emil sort of began as an activist, during that battle. So meet Emil De Guzman, everyone. And Emil, please introduce yourself and tell us about, how your time growing up in the city, you're a graduate of Washington High, and how you got involved in the International Hotel standoff.
Okay, well, thank you, Amy, for that introduction. Very, 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 accommodating introduction. Yeah, my life has, I was born in the late 40s, and I was born in San Francisco to immigrant parents, Filipino parents, and I grew up in the Fillmore at first, and this was my first community. And the Fillmore was a very, you might say, multiracial, diverse community, and it was predominantly Black and Japanese and Filipino.
Mm-hmm.
And this was really quite an amazing time for me as a child, because I went to a Japanese school, and I was basically surrounded in a community with many different kinds of people, working class predominantly, but multiracial. And as I was growing up, I really began to pick up on just many things as a child.
Mm-hmm.
For example, I went from living in the Fillmore in my earliest years when I started going to school to into the Richmond district, which was predominantly a white district. And I went to Catholic school, and by there I was really one of the only non-whites in that school. And it was a very different kind of experience because my classmates were Irish and Italian but as a child I made great friends with many of them, but I was also bullied as a child. That it was very hurtful as a child, trying to deal with the fact that even then there was a lot of racial prejudice among some of my classmates. But I learned to adapt. In other words, I really internalized it, and it really had scars as I was later growing up, as I became older as a teenager, and then into when I went to college. And it's really at that experience that really precipitated my being able to see the world differently. In other words, I began to see that there was a word called racism, and I felt that that was me, that I was victimized as a child. And it was really that motivated me to see how, how this was a hate. This was really kind of a hate that I experienced, that I really began to rebel, that I began to really become part of a whole bigger movement, because it was a time of the anti-war movement, the civil rights and Black Power movement.
Right.
I began to see that, the people were like me, who were faced with fighting many of the social and economic, issues, of that time. And
Right.
it was really a revelation, to the point where I really went through sort of a rebirth, that my being involved in the Third World Strike at Berkeley, the anti-war movement, and then later the fighting to establish ethnic studies at Berkeley, that really gave me the push to really change my life. That is, I began to find my calling was to become an organizer. And I was very, very impressed with going to places where I would meet elderly Filipino farm workers who were great leaders of that time, Filipinos. And they showed me the way, that is, that they had endured fighting for their union, for the United Farm Workers, but at the same time they were faced as second-class citizens with the, with being at the bottom, the economic ladder. They were faced with anti-miscegenation laws.
Wow.
Some of them never went back to the Philippines, and they didn't have families. And it was really that. And I had grown up in a community with many uncles and aunts who were immigrants, and who were never, you never saw among the pictures that we had in the house any college graduates. Many of them were just menial workers,
Like service workers.
Yeah, working and the canneries in Alaska, working as farm workers, working as hotels, and just menial jobs in order to be able to raise their families. So it was really that experience. It was that experience that really made me realize that, that motivated me to move into another level, which was to be active in a community that was faced with eviction. That
Right.
is, it was a poor community of elderly who were faced with, going against an owner who wanted to tear down their home.
Right. And can you just to place us, just give the overview of where the International Hotel used to be located, and what, the residents there, like characterizing them, and why that battle became so important.
Well, it was really a struggle where many of the elderly had no choice but to face an eviction, and it was right at the tip of the Third World Strike. So it went from Berkeley into this struggle, and for those of us who were high on fighting for against school. That is, they conceded to give forming an ethnic studies, that it was really unprecedented that they would, make that concession.
Right.
That is,
Well,
at
the same thing was
university and the
happening
state.
the same thing was happening at SF State, right? Around the same time.
Right.
The battle for ethnic studies.
Yeah,
right.
the battle for ethnic studies, third world strike, was really going on at the same time at Berkeley, at San Francisco State.
Right. So was the International Hotel in Chinatown, or it was like what part of the city? And
Well, the International Hotel was on Kearny Street, and that was considered Manila Town, which was bordering Chinatown. And historically, if you look at the rest of the West Coast, many Chinatowns were bordering Manila towns. That is, the Filipinos and the Asians done together, and a lot of it is because of de facto segregation.
Sure.
These were the
Yep.
this is the only place where they lived. But again, it was mainly hotels that they lived in. They were single men and women. But the rage, the eviction happened where the elderly had no way of protecting themselves against eviction, and it took the students that I was part of, a student movement, to come in there and to be able to defend them, to be able to take on the colossal responsibility of working with the elderly to fight the owner, who was a very powerful real estate tycoon, Shorenstein. And he wanted to tear the building down. He wanted to build a parking lot, and
Right.
the years of neglect when we entered that building was such that it was a slum. That is, that they had not given any attempt to try to fix it, to try to upgrade it. Our elderly lived, in horrible conditions with the furniture, and it was just really a very sad place for them to live. But yet, this was their home, and they had no other place to go.
Wow.
And this was the fight. The fight was to preserve and to be able to defend them, their right to be able to have a home, because the city at that time really was never good at being able to provide alternative housing for our elderly. They didn't care, and so much of the house, there was really so many other battles for housing in Japantown, and the Yerba Buena, where they just were tearing down neighborhoods, and yet it just meant forcing people to move out of their homes, making way for what they call redevelopment.
Right.
But anyway, this was a fight, and my involvement was as a student leader to get involved. I graduated from Berkeley. I went into working at the hotel, as a volunteer for a number of years, and it was just really with the force of the students that we ran the hotel. That is, that we, with the elderly and the tenants of that community, we went into the hotel business, you might say, rehabbed the building, did the painting, removed the old furniture, put in new furniture, built sense of community, gave people a sense of caring, of bringing in social workers and medical and dental students, and the community, to social nonprofits to work with the tenants. And this was a big change. This was for many elderly who were not really political at all, but saw the enormous change happening, that it was really that kind of fusing with the students that began to see a movement, that it was precipitating an anti-eviction movement that began to gather momentum and strength with public support. And it was really over the course of 8 years that we were able to build a pretty strong base of support to stop the owner, to the point where the city couldn't really move on us. They couldn't figure out, because it was really the momentum and the strength of a movement of people defending the tenants that really gained such support.
Right.
Not just locally or even nationally, but even internationally, people coming from all over the world to see the
Yeah, I
international
remember it
hotel
being on
tenants.
I remember it being on the news like every night,
Yeah.
and I don't remember the resolution, but if you can maybe just fast forward a bit to, how it all played out ultimately, and then we'll move to, the discussion about, what that means in today's context, given, people are struggling to be able to afford to live in the city.
Yeah. Well, it's remember so much of the city, where Manila Town and Chinatown is that it's really the oldest part of the city. And what I mean by that is that the buildings and that neighborhood was resurrected after the 1906 earthquake. So, there was never an attempt to try to make the hotel a long-term, home. It was really an attempt to try to destroy it, make way to expand the financial district with another high-rise.
Right.
And San Francisco went through a transition after World War II. That is, when they needed to expand, expand capitalism in San Francisco. They basically had to build more high rises. They had to build, more of that financial district. And so the space that they looked at was Kearny Street, and they saw the I Hotel in that path.
Right. So
this was really, so-called progress, just like Japantown, just like, Yerba Buena. So much of the old part of San Francisco had to make way for the new part of San Francisco. And yet the ones who were going to suffer were the elderly, the poor.
Right.
And this is really the statement of the I Hotel. It was really a statement that this is not acceptable, that not in San Francisco.
Right.
And this is still the same problem today. I don't mean to just jump ahead, but you're talking about homelessness, and you're talking about the fact that there's so many people who are not housed properly.
Right. So what happened to the tenants at the I Hotel?
Well, in 1977, after 8 years, the tenants were faced with a court order. That is that the owners had a new owner from Thailand had prevailed with a court decision to evict. That is, the sheriffs and the city were prepared to force the tenants out. And let me just begin by saying that so much of what we had done in that 8 years was to be able to defend and even, build the kind of base of support that made it hard for them to be able to execute a plan. I mean, I used to work for the Human Rights Commission, and the evictions happened within 30 days after a court order is initiated. But this took 8 years.
Right.
And it was because it was the political nature of building this movement that made them have to think about how to evict, how to go about it. In 1977, in August, after the court order, they did launch on August 4th. They did launch an eviction. They did have 200 to 300 police, sheriffs, and firemen come in, and they basically routed the whole. They cleared the building. They forced everybody out. They went through a human barricade of over 3,000 people. They battled them. They moved them out of the way. They took the tenants out, threw them out on the street. There was no place for them to go. They had only the clothes on their back. This was the ultimate end. This was the end of a battle,
right,
of the International Hotel, to be able to throw the people out on the street without no other place to go. And we're talking about elderly. We're talking about people who were really at the quite on out of their years. And they lost their community, when they were forced out. They had to scramble to figure a new place to live. They had to, they were without their friends.
Right.
It was a very tragic end for many of them. It was really they died of a broken heart.
Right.
Because they lost all their,
yeah,
their community, their friends.
Yeah, and
their
very
family.
traumatic.
Yeah.
Right.
And I had to go through, and I basically was around for those 2 years. I mean, when I was evicted, I was 29 years old.
Wow.
And I was, I was broke. I mean, I'd been a volunteer. I was a leader, but I was, I had to kind of move on with my life. But it was just, it was a very hard and very difficult time for me to see a lot of them go, that they passed on. But the struggle never ended, and we all knew that, that the fight was for the land, and to be able to fight to get that land back up as housing that was so needed, in a very overcrowded community. I mean, at that time, Chinatown was compared to Manhattan in New York because of its overcrowdedness. It was just a very overcrowded neighborhood where there wasn't really much done to be able to build up the housing needs of that community.
Right.
Chinatown was good as a tourist trap, for tourists and
sure
people in there. But people lived there, but they lived in very squalid, very, very difficult and very poor conditions. So the fight was to get new housing on that spot, and that's what we did. In 2005, we were able to get a new building on the same spot.
Wow.
It became 104 units of federally funded, subsidized housing for the elderly, and this was a victory. The new building is like stands as a symbol for all the other Manila towns besides San Francisco, for the fact that elderly live there, and so much of the same problem that the central districts of these different cities, from Seattle all the way to San Diego, all had a very same setup where there was Chinatowns and Manila towns, and then they were all torn down so they could make way for our financial districts. Well, San Francisco, we were able to reverse that and put up. But remember, the Manila town community was 10 blocks, and we're only talking about 1 block to be able to get this new building up. So in that sense, my fight has always been to try to ensure that we try to, talk about what the history has been, so that people know that this was really a history of human beings, Filipinos and Chinese, living together in a community that used to be there, that it was basically destroyed in order to be able to make way for the financial district. And at the same time, there was never any attempt to try to rebuild any new housing, any alternative housing, because these were poor people. They didn't want it. The city doesn't see the need to do that, and if it does it in such a very peaceful way. That's why you have a gigantic homelessness, because there's just so much more people who and then there are affordable housing, affordable rents,
Exactly.
you know.
And that is, it's not, that dynamic is not entirely unique to San Francisco, as you've just walked us through. But, as you know, and I know from having been born and grew up there, the disconnect is that, since, the last 100 odd years, we've had this reputation of being so-called progressive city and liberal and all this. And yet, the really rich people drive so much of the policies around housing, around, all of the nodes of uh, affordability. And that persists today. And it's become wave after wave across many, many mayoral administrations where you'll have, whether it's George Moscone, God rest his soul, or although Alioto, I don't remember him being terribly progressive, although he was a Democrat. But it's like I don't understand why this housing issue really has been so persistent, given the vast amounts of money that are always flowing in through San Francisco. It's a historic port town, since its founding, and it's a big source of frustration for me. So when you look around now, what do you see as being, like, why is this still continuing? And you literally were in the belly of the beast on that international hotel battle. 2005, you said they put up a elderly affordable housing building in that same area, but there's still such a great need, right? And now we have all these billionaires running, like really rich people who are not even from the city, right?
Right. Well, we live in a time when you're seeing, a capitalist system that I think is on the decline. That is that they're so desperate to try to, undermine, the lives of the middle class and the poor. That is that you're trying to extract more profits in the way that they see the world. So, yeah, it's a question of affordability. That is, we're not seeing funding for education. We're not seeing funding for medical care. We're seeing people cut from jobs, and we're seeing, greater homelessness, and we're seeing more of the taxes that going to the upper class as well as toward the military industrial complex. We're not this. We live in a time when there's going to be greater suffering, and there's going to be a time when so much of the way that they're going to rule is through federal agents like ICE or Homeland Security. They're going to go after the people on the bottom, which are the immigrants, people of color. There's so much turmoil now in this country, and there's so much and the fact that the Trump administration is so more repressive that there's going to be greater greater challenges to the working class. And for those of us who are, really have been active all these years, I mean, there's no way to compare it to the Nixon years or the Reagan years. We're just seeing you might say, I've never really seen this before, but you're seeing more of a fascist, a very authoritarian trend where there is going to be greater, there's going to be this country is really going to change dramatically in a way where as more attacks are made, as the government, and we're talking about the next 3 years, that there already is challenges that we are making toward because of how horrendous things have been, not only here
Right.
but in other parts of the world. So
Sure.
we're seeing something that we've never seen really before. And,
Right.
and the only way that we can really deal with it is we have to stand together, and we have to really talk with each other to be able to see what we can do. And let me point something out about something I experienced, because I think this may lend some credence to what I think we're faced with today. When we talk about Martin Luther King, and even Malcolm, one of the qualities that they had as leaders was that they were faced with enormous pressures, but one thing was never in their character was not to despair. In other words,
right.
not a sense of giving in.
Right.
to
Hopelessness. Right.
They didn't give in. And part of what I experienced in the I Hotel was that as we continue to keep, I feel like what I have in my book a section on of offensive, like offensive as a way of being able to continue to go into, keep in our defense, to go on the offensive. But the way that I would look at it is that civil resistance, the function of civil resistance as we were able to understand it was to provoke, to provoke a response, to be able to continue to provoke. And Martin Luther King, I think, totally understood that by provoking until you get a response or the change the law, will you be able to get them to be able to really respond. And what does this mean? Well, it means one thing: you're in control.
Yeah.
Gandhi
And
was able to express that, and Martin Luther King was a follower of that concept, that by provoking, by being able to engage in fighting for economic justice, for housing, for basically fighting, for civil rights, that this was forcing the system to respond, the federal government to respond, and he was able to successfully get things changed, by what he did. That to me, but why? How did he do that? How did he fight the despair and the hopelessness? Well, it's because he, through the process of building a mass movement of millions and millions of people behind him, he was fearless. Then there was a very liberating part of him to be able to continue to keep doing, knowing even that crossing the line was that you could very well face assassination, which ultimately happened, as well as to Malcolm. Right.
Right.
But because of
Right.
the fact that they were, riding across the wave of fighting for justice with a base of millions of people who were really believed in them and fighting with them, that there was, when you're in that milieu, you don't face fear, you go forward.
Yeah.
And
you have to be courageous.
And you're making the changes. You're making the changes one after the other. And Gandhi was able to do that with the masses of people, and Martin Luther King was able to do that, and Malcolm. And I think that is the key ingredient toward why International Hotel was very successful, because there was, it took an eviction. In other words, it took police violence. It took about hundreds the government, in order to be able to throw out as a way of being able to execute the eviction, to be able to take people out of their homes. But up until that point, there was no compromise. There was no, they couldn't they couldn't find a way of dividing
Right.
Our movement.
Right.
You know,
Yeah. No,
that
because
we-
it went
that
on.
we
It went
we
on for
came
8
there on
years.
our own
Yeah.
terms all the way to the end. So
Yeah.
this is really a very key factor in terms of being able to see the link between our movement and between, what other leaders were able to do. And by being able to do this, they were faced with one thing. They were assassinated. John F. Kennedy was assassinated. Robert F. Kennedy was assassinated. Martin Luther King, Malcolm, Patrice
Medgar Evers.
Lumumba,
Yeah.
Fred
Yeah.
Hampton. I mean, that's ultimately what happens when you have great leaders, people who really are
Right.
at that point where they feel the sense of liberation and strength in order at the top of a movement, because the only way that they can be stopped is if they've had to be murdered.
Eliminated. Right. So do you see, we recently had a 4-day long teacher strike on the San Francisco Unified Public Schools. And you and I have talked about this offline a little bit. And, as that was about to begin in the last few weeks. But what are your thoughts about how that played out in terms of the resistance? The movement was obviously enough where the money people at the mayor's office in the front office of SF Unified essentially caved after 4 days of teachers picketing and being out in the streets and being a coalition.
Right. Well, my thoughts about this is that to get to a point where you can have a strike vote by the teachers, I think was really a culmination of so much that had happened prior. That is, the 1 year of negotiations didn't lead toward, was not fruitful. Yet there was a certain point where the teachers united and voted, for a strike. But there
First
was
strike since '79. Yeah,
since
it's been many
79.
years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, my wife was a teacher for 26 years, and there were many contracts that were voted on. But this was a different strike. This was where so much was about affordability, and about wages, and
Healthcare.
Healthcare, also about the special education for the kids, and so there's they were able to, the teachers were able to win a contract, but it's really unclear how that contract will unfold in terms of what it does to really repair the actual
The deficit.
the deficit, but at the same time the normality of moving the whole district forward, because they don't have all the money to be able to afford everything that they've agreed to,
Right.
and that is a major problem, major difference. And affordability also falls on the teachers who can't afford to live in San Francisco. They
Right.
can't afford to live, they have to. So that option for them is that they could move anywhere, any other part of the state, and probably even be paid better, and yet the conditions of those districts may be even better. I mean, all school districts are all faced with the same problems, cutbacks. They're talking about the fact that there's a decline in enrollment. I mean, to me, the suffering is an achievement gap. And I've always believed that schools are about excellence. There has to be a way of looking at providing education for the students so that they have excellence, so that they can move on in their life, to college or trades or whatever.
Right.
And but at the same time, Amy, it's also about inequality, because you're talking about 30% of the whole city's children being in private schools.
Right.
And so parents are paying into a private school, hoping that they will, they get the privileges of a good education.
Right.
So they're spending, maybe 50,000 or so.
Yeah.
But then when you talk about San Francisco, we're talking about $12,000. That goes toward every child. So
Right.
so the inequality will exist, and the inequality could also affect whether children are able to read and whether they'll be able to move on. There's just so much of that really goes on without paying attention. Yet we have a great, workforce. Teachers are dedicated people, and they don't get paid enough. At a time when institutions like the police department get the lion's share, the fire and the sheriffs get the lion's share of the general fund.
Of the budget. Yeah.
There's so little that goes to the institution of education, whereas it's so invaluable given the fact that these are the leaders, the future leaders, that you want to really pay attention to their growth, and that they have a kind of an education that frees them in order to be able to really continue with a career, in life. So there's to me, you asked me a kind of a difficult question that's very hard to really answer, because I'm very pessimistic, and it's
Okay.
I just don't understand. I don't see the I see still the students are the losers. That is the poor and the working class, and even the middle class are faced with with a district that may not be completely compliant with being able to really improve the system.
Right. Do you think the mayor, Mayor Lurie, Daniel Lurie, who's heir to the Levi Strauss fortune, neophyte politician, just has been in office a little more than a year. Do you think he really has a grasp of how unaffordable the city is now for the very workers, like teachers, like muni drivers, the librarians who power the neighborhood libraries and public infrastructure across the city? Do you think he really understands that it is becoming unsustainable for the people who actually drive the muni buses and drive the and teach in the public schools? I'm not sure. I don't think he really gets that.
Yeah, I've met with Daniel, and I think he's a really great guy, but he's sort of swimming against the stream. He inherited a job that really already had incredible. It's sort of like a wall that he had to really.
Did he inherit it, or did he seek it out? He threw his hat in the ring and got himself elected.
Yeah, he got elected, but I think he's sort of moving in the right path, but I think that obviously he's got so many, he has so many things that he faces that will be impossible in order to overcome. For example, he operates as a mayor in the context of a whole national,
landscape
system that really is not. We're talking about swimming upstream, where he has to look at education. He has to look at, deficits that face the city. And one of the things that's rather noteworthy about him is that he's even put his own money in terms of covering some of the costs. He's his own fortune into the city. Plus, he's also got money from the billionaires in order to help him out. So in that sense, I really applaud him. He's also got some good people that I feel the think tank around him is really able to answer. But the question of San Francisco, it's not going to be any different from any other city like New York, where you have an incredible, you're talking about that they're not able to really solve the housing issues. They're not able to solve transportation. They're not able to, Mandami is faced with that, and he's trying his best, but there's to have a federal government that cuts him off, for example, and then a state legislature that I just read in the paper that the governor is not. We're not talking about a billionaire's wealth tax that can help cover New York. That how do you
that sounds familiar, because Gavin too is against the SEIU's proposal to tax billionaires here in California more.
That's exactly right. That is that in many ways he's just covering his. I think of his own class. He, to me, it's sort of like he shows that sort of affiliation or defense of the billionaire class,
right?
Because so-called he doesn't want these billionaires to move out of California in order to be able to go to another state. No, this is bizarre. I mean, and the problem with this country, it's a capitalist system. I mean, they're extracting, the GDP goes to the upper 1%.
Right.
Well, the rest of is the middle class and the working and the poor are the ones who get the crumbs, from all that. So we're in for a rough ride, and it's not going to get any better. You're talking about a competition with China, and on a global scale, you're talking about BRICS, the formation of another alternative currency, local currency. Then, and you're talking about the fact that they want to move off the petrodollars. You're talking about the fact that and so what does Trump do? He starts invading countries like Venezuela, and now he's talking about bombing Iran. I mean,
right.
His desperation to me is really no different from what the U.S. government's position has always been. It's an imperialist position. It could have been under Obama, and it's been consistently with Biden. There's no real difference. It's really not about Democrats or Republicans or left or right. It's about top down.
Right.
It's really about the fact that and I think that my fear. I'm just being in my own position, but my fear is that our children are going to be faced with enormous challenges because of the fact that there's a decline in terms of
opportunities.
Decline in terms of a system that's going to make it more costly for them to be able to live, to survive.
Right.
I mean, the fact that we live today, where my wife and I have a house, right? We talk all the time about how our kids, as much as they're on a career path and they're doing well, are not going to be able to buy a house in San Francisco.
Right.
They're not going to be able to buy a house in the Bay Area because our house probably today is worth about $2 million. That's just, that we could have never been able to afford this, 25 years ago, and we were fortunately able to, but it's like the rest of the country is really in the same darning path. There's an extraction of wealth at the top, robbing the people from the bottom. Yet they're the ones who create the inflation. They can create the cost of living that we are all served. So what are we supposed to do? How are we going to be able to organize and really fight this?
Well, that actually is a good way for us to start wrapping this up, because I try not. You said you're a pessimist. I'm trying not to be. I try to be healthy. Try to have a degree of healthy skepticism, but I also try to be optimistic. And just speaking for myself, having grown up in San Francisco in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, it really did. It was a labor town. It's not that so much anymore. But it imbued in me. I grew up in a middle/working class family, a degree of both optimism, resiliency, and grit. And I'm always wanting to be solutions oriented. So I want to know if you see anything in sort of the DNA, what's left of the DNA of San Francisco, people like yourself, right? And people like me who know that, activism and strategic application of pressure, whether it's politically or economically, a strike or a boycott, can maybe begin to bring us back to a better equilibrium in terms of income inequality and people being able to access opportunities, right? Part of the reason why there's so many more homeless people is because all the rich tech people come in, they make all this money, they rent up all the apartments, and then people who drive the buses and teach in the schools can't afford that. So what are the pressure points that people like your community and in my writerly and media community can be thinking about to move this back to an equilibrium?
Amy, one of the things I learned in life is that organizing is one of the best ways, one of the main weapons that can really be to be able to unite people together, to be able to really come up with a strategy and to be able to force the issue to be like I brought out the whole thing about being able to provoke. There's we're not talking about people dying on the streets today, but I mean we have obviously we have an incredible problem of just poverty. It is just rampant. Poverty in San Francisco, and middle class people or people like this, through inflation, their buying power is eroding, and they're finding limits to what they can do. Say they whether it's food or buying a house, rents or medical care. I mean, these are the very things that you can organize around because of the injustice. If there's injustice, we can organize around it. And that to me is the power. That's the secret that I think is going to make the difference, because they have to basically respond when people are angry. And I think that Minneapolis was a very good example of people who really took this whole thing about the deaths of the two individuals to a higher level, where they got tens of thousands of people living in the streets. And they promoted new things, new ideas. You take care of your neighbor, love your neighbor.
Mutual aid.
Be there with your neighbor.
Aid.
I mean, we that was an incredible. That kind of brings me back to Occupy. What they did back then. So I think that is sort of the key to what we're going to be faced with. And the thing again, what I liked about Minneapolis was that it wasn't just people on the left. It was mainstream. Right. People just came out in the open. And that was the kind of pushback that made Trump back off. That whenever he's faced with pushback, he kind of backs off. And so much has come out in the open about who ICE is. Untrained, thugs who get paid $50,000 bonus and all that. Right. And so these are. So, the more knowledge we have, the more that we can understand and be able to really identify who the enemy is and kind of what we can do about it. But it's really in the process of the challenge that I think people really, kind of rise up. Are we going to be able to find hope? And is there in San Francisco potentially an emerging leader along the lines of an MLK or a Malcolm or Jesse Jackson, who just passed away? Can we, have a hope that, the unaffordability aspect can be addressed through movements and organizing that you're really an expert in? Well, and my response on that is that I think that the conditions are going to have to change, where they're overwhelmingly against against the people. When there's great repression, when things really get to the point where the government begins to, say, agitate or cause an incredible,
Upheaval.
I think that's when you begin to see people respond. Everyone responds differently, but I think that there will be an emergence of new leadership that will come about. I have a lot of faith in young people, and I say that because the energy's there. I've been on those marches in the King,
No Kings, yeah.
Yeah, and there was another, and I've seen, I think of myself being in my 20s and being in that position where I had an open mind, and I had really the whole thing of being able to put more things in context to be able to do something about it, to act on it. And I think that that's really the hope, that no, this is not tolerable. This is intolerable. And
right.
And I think for those of us who have been around and seen this, have seen it through experience that, people will come out, and people will have. I remember the anti-war movement, 250,000 people here in San Francisco.
Right.
And this was all. This was a major. It was happening here in San Francisco and D.C. This was a major reason why, basically, Nixon backed down. They had to back down because of the fact the American people were fed up that there was a loss of life of 50,000 American soldiers who died in the course of that war, plus the millions that died in Vietnam. This was just absolutely excruciating, and this was what brought the years to the end. Look at Afghanistan. Look at what happened in the Middle East with Syria and Iraq. And, they've all been defeated. They never had any real victory, and it's continuing to see the same trend. Same thing will happen with Iran. Now it's happening in Venezuela, and you're seeing now the pushback in Ukraine. All these things have shown the defeat. There isn't any longer the kind of superiority that the American possess. It's really moving in the direction of a decline. And so
and we're seeing versions of wars on the streets of American cities.
Right.
So hopefully, the Bay Area's activism DNA and anti-war DNA is still there, and emerging leaders will help us, be able to make the city more equitable, because right now it is bleak. The unaffordability is off the charts, and your example and your story of the International Hotel, your book, Red Sky, Recollections of the International Hotel, is very inspiring. And that's why Lloyd and I really were eager to have you come on and share your wisdom with us and your thoughts about all that you were involved in, and how we should maybe try and take lessons from all the activism work that you've done over many years. So thank you, Emil. We really appreciate it.
Jamie and Lloyd.
You're joining us. Yeah. So please like and subscribe to Workers in the Bay Back in the Day, where we have conversations about the working class people and middle class people in San Francisco and all around the Bay Area, and how we can potentially be a bit of a guiding light in this basically a kind of dark time in America. But, as I said, San Francisco and the Bay Area has great DNA of social justice activism, economic equality movements, and Emil De Guzman, our guest today, has been a long-time leader in that. So thanks, everyone. Please like and subscribe to Workers in the Bay here at Patreon, and we'll see you next time.